I'm the child of an affair, and I'm exhausted from always feeling unwanted and overlooked. Part 1. I'm not really sure how this works, but my friend keeps talking about this site, so I figured why not give it a shot. Sorry if this is long, I've got a lot on my mind. I'm Ellie, 18, born on January 29th, 1990. My parents had been married for 15 years when I was born. But the catch is, they were married to other people. I'm the result of a 14-month affair at their office. Today is supposed to be my high school graduation party. I guess technically it is. My parents decided to split the cost, which really means splitting the effort. They brought me to Riverside Park here in Bellevue. Only my mom's sticking around the whole time, though. My parents can't even talk to each other unless it's about picking me up or dropping me off. There's pizza, not my favorite, but it's fine. And at least they got buttercream icing this time. I've got a bunch of friends, and like a dozen of them showed up. There wasn't enough food for everyone. Not really surprising. I knew that going in. We took a walk along the trails, but I couldn't stay out too long because I knew my mom would complain about being left alone. The party lasted about an hour and a half, and then my mom was ready to bail. I would have loved to leave with my friends, but my mom insisted that I drive her here in my 2000 Dodge Neon. She didn't want to waste gas in her new Escalade, and my stepdad was out, so she couldn't pump her own gas. Plus, I'm not even allowed to touch her car. It's so ridiculous. So I had the joy of driving her back home, listening to her go on about how I seemed ungrateful for the party. When we got home, I opened my cards. My friends are the best. They wrote the sweetest things and gave me some cash. My mom and stepdad gave me $20, and my dad and stepmom gave me $25. I knew he'd do that. My dad always has to one-up my mom. For two people who spent months hooking up in an office, they sure can't stand each other now. None of my siblings came to the party. They all live on their own, have jobs, but no cards, no texts, nothing. I'm used to being left out, though. Honestly, I was relieved when I turned 11 and my parents stopped making my siblings watch me. Listening to 5 people who are supposed to care about you call you a waste of time, that does something to an 8-year-old. I know I probably sound like I'm whining about stupid stuff, but it's just sad. I feel sad all the time. It's like I don't matter to any of them. My parents screwed up, not me, but it feels like I'm the one paying for it. But hey, some good news. My Aunt Linda's card came yesterday, and it had $150 in it. Seriously, she's the best. Her and my cousins are the only reason I still love Christmas. I called her to thank her, and we ended up chatting for 2 hours because each of my cousins wanted to talk too. In 3 months, I'll finally be living near them and far away from all this mess. I can't wait. My parents are already trying to guilt trip me, but I'm so over it at this point. The funniest part was my dad acting like me moving out of state was why he wasn't helping with college. Like he was ever going to help anyway. I'm heading to the University of Missouri, Missouri Tigers. I'm so excited because my aunt and cousins live nearby in Boonville, so I'll get to see them all the time. Mizzou was my first choice. I checked out Iowa and Iowa State too, but Iowa got scratched off the list fast thanks to the most obnoxious tour guide I've ever met. Alicia, if you're reading this, your attitude was enough to make me lose all respect for pole vaulters. Iowa State was okay, but it just couldn't compete with being near my aunt and cousins. I'm going pre-med, then I'm planning to get into med school and become the world's greatest plastic surgeon. I've dreamed of being a doctor since I was a kid, long before I even knew about Grey's Anatomy. Move-in day on August 15th is the start of the journey to Dr. Ellie Turner, MD, saving the world one facelift at a time. All right, enough about my life. Let's get to why I'm writing all this. I need to know if I'm being a jerk here. One of my friends thinks my plan is kind of a jerk move. What I haven't told my parents is that once I move, I'm not coming back. I've got plenty of scholarships lined up and student loans will cover the rest. My Aunt Linda said I can stay with her during breaks and holidays, and I plan to get a job somewhere near Columbia. I'm not asking my parents to help me move. I'm leaving 2 days early and heading out without telling them. I'm serious. I'm not setting foot in Nebraska again. Does that make me an awful person? I just don't feel like I owe anyone an explanation. I've always been an afterthought to them, and this graduation party is just one small example in a lifetime of the same crappy behavior. Most of my friends agree with me. They all say my family sucks, but one friend said my plan is kind of harsh. That's why I came back to share the full story, since so many people asked about it. I've pieced together what I know over the years, mostly from overhearing conversations or when my parents would argue. This all happened ages ago. Let's start with my dad, who I'll call Frank. Frank, 57M, married my stepmom, Karen, 52F, back in 1975. He works at Mutual of Omaha, and he makes good money. From what I can guess, based on my oldest brother's birthday compared to their wedding date, they probably had to get married. I've got two older brothers on that side, Michael, 32M, and Matt, 36M. Karen has always been a stay-at-home mom. My mom, Linda, 56F, is married to Jim, 58M, my stepdad. He works at Kiewit. I have no idea what he actually does, but he makes decent money too. I've got three older siblings on this side, Jessica, 32F, Jenna, 29F, and Jake, 26M. My mom always says she was an independent woman before Jim came into the picture, but once she got pregnant with my oldest sister, she became a stay-at-home mom. That was until a year after Jake started school, when she said she was bored and got a job at Mutual of Omaha. I have no idea what she did there, but I do know she wasn't my dad's secretary. At least they weren't that cliche, thank goodness. I'm not exactly sure when the affair started, but it went on for a while, right up until my mom got pregnant with me. I remember when I was about 7, I got into Jenna's makeup, and she said, "I wish Grandma hadn't stopped Mom from aborting you." I have no idea if that's true or just her being mean. I've only ever seen one photo of me with my grandma, and she was smiling while holding me, so maybe she liked me. She passed away when I was a year and a half old. My mom and Jim were apparently going through a rough patch, so there was never any doubt that I wasn't his kid. The affair almost ended both marriages, but in the end, both my parents decided to stay with their spouses. None of them wanted another kid. My parents agreed to split custody, so I'd spend 1 week at each house. They've never swapped weeks or made exceptions, except for Christmas. I spend the 23rd and 24th with my dad's side, and the 25th and 26th with my mom's side. Both my parents told their spouses the affair was a one-time thing, but Jim went into full detective mode. He found an old hotel receipt from 8 months before and dug through bank statements. When they'd fight, which was often when I was there, he'd bring up stuff like, "I'm checking the bank statements, you're acting like the same bitch you were when you were screwing Frank." He even had friends at Mutual who said the rumors had started well before he found out. Eventually, I think my mom just told him to stop. I know Jim once delivered a letter to Karen trying to wreck my dad's marriage, but good luck with that. Karen's never leaving her sugar daddy, and as far as I can tell, my dad's still cheating. Both of my parents have paid the price, though. Even now, nearly 18 years later, my step-parents love to throw the affair in their faces during arguments. My dad bends over backward to keep Karen happy. If she wants something, he drops everything to make it happen. My mom hasn't worked since she had me, and Jim guilt trips her every time she goes somewhere alone, interrogating her about it when she gets back. The funniest part about all this is how my parents, with their denial and blame shifting, somehow managed to blow up their own lives and still act like it's my fault. My siblings have always resented me. They talk like their parents are perfect when I'm not around, like everything's just peachy, no fighting, just this great loving atmosphere. But when I'm there, it's a whole different story. The tension from my step-parents toward me is obvious, and the cheater always does whatever they can to make them feel better about it. My siblings have never wanted anything to do with me. I get that they're a lot older than me, and now that I'm grown, I kind of get it, but I've been on the outside looking in for as long as I can remember. Even when they became adults, they rarely showed up to my birthdays or events, and if they did, it was usually because they'd get something like a free dinner out of it. I'm used to it by now, but the little things I've learned over the years sting the most. Like, my mom and Jim took the whole family to Disney every time one of them turned 6. I've never been to Disney. My dad would take his kids out to eat wherever they wanted for their birthdays, at least when we were younger. That doesn't happen as much now that they're older, but for my birthday, it's usually fast food and it's just me and my dad. I wasn't invited to any of my siblings' weddings. They were either no kids allowed or held on the opposite parent's weekend. Now that I'm 18, Jamie's getting married in September and I'm not invited because it's on my dad's weekend. Like, come on. I'm 18. We don't need to follow the custody agreement anymore. This kind of stuff happened with vacations and parties almost every single time. Those are the big things, but there's a million smaller things too. My mom used to take my older sisters for mani-pedi days, and I was always told it was a big girl thing. When I got older, it became her catching up with her adult daughters. I've never really connected with anyone on my dad's side. They're all about boy things, and girl stuff just isn't on the radar. I've seen photos of my siblings doing all sorts of activities, youth sports, dance, science camps, art camps, you name it. I didn't get to do any of that unless it was to save face or had overnights so I'd be out of the house. I didn't start doing extracurriculars until middle school, and that was all through the school itself. I know it sounds whiny, but it really hurts. My siblings got to do all these great things, and I didn't. I know lots of kids don't get to do this stuff or even have new clothes. I did because keeping up appearances was everything. But my parents had the money, they just chose not to spend it on me. My mom's older brother is nice enough, but he's pretty hands-off with kids. I never had grandpas. One grandma passed when I was a baby, and the other one's just a mean old lady, but she's like that with everyone. The only relatives I really have that are great are my Aunt Dina, who's my dad's younger sister, her husband Henry, and my cousins Gabby and Grace. Gabby had what she calls a mishap. So Aunt Dina's a grandma now to Elias, who's the cutest little guy. I love them all so much. I'm not super close with Henry since he's quiet, but he's really nice. I only get to see them every other Christmas because they spend the other one in Norway with Henry's family. I did get to stay with them for 2 weeks last year, and it was incredible. I've always suspected that Aunt Dina's the reason my dad doesn't completely ignore me. Anyway, just 2 more months and I'm leaving Bellevue for good. I'll be around my aunt and cousins, and I can't wait. I honestly wonder how long it'll take my family to even notice I'm gone or that I haven't called. Part 2. Wait till you hear this mess. So last year, I told you all about my plan to cut off my family once I left for college, and I stuck to it. I left on August 13th, 2 days before move-in day, without saying a word. On the 14th, I got a text from my dad asking where I was. I replied, at college in Columbia. My mom messaged me asking if I was coming home for Thanksgiving because they were going to my brother Matt's place in Lincoln, and she wasn't sure I'd want to make the extra drive. It's literally just an hour from Bellevue. I ignored it. They gave me my answer on how long it'd take them to call me the first time. I went a whole year without hearing from them. I didn't block anyone, didn't hide my Facebook page. I got 3 messages total. The one about Thanksgiving and one from each parent about Christmas. I didn't go home for Christmas since my aunt and uncle were in Norway. I ended up house sitting for them instead. During the spring semester, they didn't even bother reaching out. Meanwhile, I've loved every minute of my first year here. I get to spend more time with my aunt and cousins than ever before, and I'm obsessed with being Auntie Ellie to little Elias. I found a job as a hostess, made some good friends, and even met my boyfriend. He's also pre-med and has a job, so we're both super busy. We mostly spend our time studying, if you catch my drift. But now I've got a huge problem. My boyfriend suggested I get a credit card to start building credit, so I went to my bank to look into it. They had a few options for people with no credit history, so I picked one and they ran my credit. Turns out I didn't have, when I dug into it, I discovered 2 maxed out defaulted credit cards in my name, one for $3,000 and another for $4,000, both unpaid for over 6 months. I called the card company for a statement, and the charges were all for wedding stuff, catering, a DJ, things like that. And then it clicked. My brother Jamie got married last September, and as usual, it was planned to make sure I couldn't be there. I called my mom, furious, and she tried to downplay it all. I don't think I've ever yelled at her like that before. She went on about how family helps family, but I told her straight up that she stole from me. She denied it, saying Mark needed the money for the wedding and was planning to pay it off. When I pointed out the cards were in default, she just kept making excuses. Then she started on this whole spiel about how things are tight right now, they're overextended, and they just needed a little help, especially with the wedding costs. I lost it. I told her they didn't even want me at the wedding they paid for with money stolen from me. She tried to turn it around, saying I was always invited and just didn't come. Then came the guilt trip about how we all have to be there for each other, how Mark takes care of everyone and just needed a little help from me. The reality is, Mark doesn't care about me. To him, I'm just a reminder of his failures. I finally told her she had a week to fix it, then hung up. I've been so angry for 2 days straight. I can't believe they would pull this crap, especially after everything I've put up with my whole life. I finally get away from them, and this is what they do. I told Aunt Dina everything, and she said I should go to the police. And honestly, I'm seriously considering it. This whole mess dragged on for a long time, which didn't surprise me. There were several continuances, but eventually, Mark Whitmore took a plea deal. I asked the prosecutor about my mom's involvement too, since she clearly knew what Mark had done. He told me they could potentially go after her, but it would be much tougher. They had a lot of evidence showing Mark was the one who opened the credit cards and used them directly. My mom could always claim she found out after the fact, and while there might be something there, it wasn't enough to justify the cost of pursuing charges against her. I accepted that. I'm just glad it's over. It took nearly 2 years from start to finish. Thankfully, I got all the debt removed from my record and my credit score repaired. The best part was getting to testify at Mark's sentencing. They let me tell my entire story, laying out all the trauma I'd endured because of him, my mom, and my siblings. It felt incredible to finally unload all that. Now, here's the best part. The original plea deal was for Mark to get 18 months in prison and a $15,000 fine. But the judge went further, sentencing him to 30 months and a $20,000 fine. He called Mark a bad father and an even worse man. I'm so grateful the judge saw him for who he really is. My Aunt Dina, Uncle Henry, cousins Gabby and Grace, and my boyfriend were all there to support me. Not the same boyfriend from my earlier posts. I had another in between, but I've been dating this guy for about 8 weeks now. It was awesome of him to drive up with me from Missouri. I had to hold back from cheering when they walked Mark out in cuffs. My mom and siblings were all crying and glaring at me, but my dad and Brienne were there too, giving them death stares right back. It was a whole scene. I thought that would be the end of it, at least for a while. My first week back on campus after the sentencing felt strangely calm. I'd been dealing with this for 2 years. It started when I was a sophomore, and now I'm just finishing my senior year, plus an extra fall semester. But hey, a lot has happened over these 4 years. Then that calm got completely. The next Friday, I was walking back to my apartment after class when my entire family showed up on campus, demanding we talk. My mom, Jessica, Jenna, Jamie, all 3 of their spouses, and Jessica's 2 kids. They were pulling out every stop on the guilt trip. I agreed to sit down at a table on campus to talk, but I wasn't about to take them back to my place. I quickly texted my boyfriend to let him know what was going on. They started off with this whole sob story, and my mom was already crying from the first word. Jessica took over and said, basically, Mom's in a bad spot financially since Mark's in jail and there's no income. I asked, it's been a week. Don't you have savings? Were you not prepared for this? You had plenty of notice that Mark was going to prison. Jessica went on, they've been struggling for a while now and the defense costs were really high. We need you to help make this right. I just stared at her, completely blank. I need to make this right? Are you kidding me? She kept pushing, yes, it didn't have to get this far. We could have paid you back and cleared this up. Going straight to the police was selfish and disrespectful to the family that's loved and cared for you. I laughed out loud. Jada, always the hothead, snapped, you've always been such a brat, just sign this paper. Jamie shot her a look like, calm down. I just asked, what paper? They pulled out some ridiculous statement and asked me to sign it. It listed all these reasons why everything I said during the case was false. I couldn't believe it. This was the dumbest Hail Mary I've ever seen. Mark's already been sentenced. He's already in prison. And now they want me to sign some crazy paper saying I made it all up? What on earth was their endgame? Proving I made it all up? What? I looked around at all of them. They'd sort of formed a horseshoe around me at this point. There's no way I'm signing that, and if any of you try to forge my name, I'll go to the police, just like I did with Mark. Jada jumped back in, all fired up. Yes, you are. We're not leaving until you do, and you're not going anywhere either. Right then, my boyfriend walked up with 2 of our other friends. You could see this moment of realization on their faces. Like, it finally hit them that they had 0 power over me anymore. I grabbed the paper, walked around them with my friends beside me, and tossed it right in the nearest trash can. None of them said a word, and none of them tried to follow us. That was about a month ago. I signed up for real estate notifications in the Bellevue area just out of curiosity. I wanted to know if my mom's house would go on the market, and it did. It felt like the final nail in the coffin. The funniest part? All three of my siblings and their spouses are doing fine financially. They could, instead of stepping up, they'd rather blame me for all their problems. Ideally, I'll never hear from any of them again. I thought this whole thing might change things with my dad's side of the family, but it didn't. I haven't heard a peep from any of them since the sentencing. I guess now that I've stuck it to Melinda, I've served my purpose and they can go back to pretending I don't exist. And you know what? That's fine. I have so much more now than I ever did with them. I just hope this whole situation convinces them to leave me alone, though I doubt it. I'm sure the Freemans will pull something sooner or later. But until that happens, I'm logging off. I'm just going to focus on chasing my dreams and living my life. Now, on to the next story. I can't shake the feeling that something might be happening between my younger sister and my husband. My name is Emily 30th, and I've been married to my husband Jack, 32M, for 6 years. Our relationship is strong. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but we've grown from it and have a loving bond. Everything was going well until about 8 months ago when my sister, Sarah, 20HF, moved back to our hometown. She had been living in Florida since she was 18, but returned after her long-term boyfriend dumped her and moved to another city, leaving her with nothing. The details of their breakup were a bit unclear. Sarah claimed he had been cheating on her with other men, but it seemed far-fetched to me. I only met him a few times, as Sarah usually only came home for Christmas and stayed for a few days. He accompanied her twice during their 5 years together, and we met him once more when Jack and I visited them for a day during our vacation 3 years ago. He didn't strike me as someone living a double life, and it was hard to believe he'd just leave Sarah with nothing. I tried reaching out to him once, but I was blocked, so I decided to let it go. When Sarah moved back, she moved in with her parents, Linda 55 and Tom 56M. She struggled to find work during her first month back, so I suggested Jack might be able to help her out since he's a higher up at his company and could probably pull some strings. He did, and Sarah landed a job in his department, which was even in her field. For some context, Sarah and I have never been close. She's always been the golden child in our mom's eyes, and our dad just goes along with whatever mom wants. It's not obvious, just a lot of little things over the years. Like when we both got cars at 16, I got an old Dodge Neon, while she got a much newer Mitsubishi Eclipse. Her dance practices, outfits, and competitions cost thousands, and my parents never hesitated. But when I'd ask for $50 for a local volleyball camp, they'd give it to me, but you'd think I was asking for a new car. The worst was when I got home 15 minutes late once, and they took my car away for a month. Meanwhile, when Sarah came home 2 hours late smelling like pot, she just got a stern talking to. So when she left for college and stayed in Florida, I wasn't exactly heartbroken. Despite all that, Sarah started spending more time at our house. At first, I thought maybe she was trying to get closer to me, but then I noticed how comfortable she and Jack were getting. They'd have long conversations about anything, share inside jokes, and if I tried to join in, they'd just say, "Oh, it's a work thing." When I asked Jack, he brushed it off, saying they just had a lot in common and worked on projects together. The first real sign something was off came when Sarah would be at our house when I got home from work. Jack has a typical 8 to 4:30 schedule, while I work from 10 to 7. This started happening regularly, and when I asked, the answer was always, "We had some work stuff to finish." Then, about 2 months ago, something happened that made me question everything. I always make our bed with the pillowcases facing a certain way before leaving for work. One day, after Sarah had been over, I noticed 2 pillows were positioned differently when I got into bed that night. I asked Jack if he'd been in bed that day, and he looked startled but quickly said no, insisting that I must have been mistaken. I checked his phone and laptop but found nothing suspicious. They work together all day and hang out afterwards, so why would they need to text? I felt like I was losing my mind. A couple of weeks ago, my parents invited us over for dinner. Everything was going smoothly until I saw something that stopped me cold. As Jack walked past Sarah, she lightly grabbed his arm, whispered something, and they touched foreheads briefly. Jack pulled away quickly and kept walking, while Sarah glanced at me with a sly smile before going back to what she was doing. I know this whole thing is a mountain of red flags, but I guess I didn't want to believe it. I've been in love with Jack since I was 21, and I can't picture him betraying me like this. So I've planned a weekend getaway to the city, and I'm going to ask him about everything. I really hope it's not what I think it is. Hey everyone, it's been 4 years since my last update, and a lot has happened. First, I want to give you an update on my life. I'm recently engaged. It took a lot of therapy to get myself back on track. I tried dating right after I got settled here in Minnesota. I went on one decent first date, but then the guy turned out to be a total jerk, and I swore off men for a while. That's when I went to therapy to process all the trauma from my husband and sister's betrayal and the abandonment by my parents. It took a full year of therapy before I met James. Funny enough, he has the same name as my dad, which I'm still getting used to. Haha. James is great. He's a chef and owns a successful restaurant and bar with his twin brother, Jack. I'm really excited about our future together. But enough about me. Let's get to the drama. About 9 months after I left, I had been completely no contact with my family. I didn't tell them where I moved, only a few friends and a couple of cousins who I was close to. One day, I came home to my apartment and found a wedding invitation in the mail. It was for Jack and Sarah's wedding, with a cringy picture of them hugging in a sunflower field. Included was a letter from my parents urging me to forgive and forget. They acknowledged that things didn't go smoothly, understatement of the year, but insisted we're a family and families work through problems. They even had the nerve to say Sarah wanted me to be her bridesmaid, just like she was for me. Seriously, what the fuck? That letter reopened a lot of old wounds, and my therapist definitely earned their paycheck that week. Now, looking back, it's laughable, but at the time, it was rough. I didn't respond. I just figured out which cousin leaked my address and cut them off too. Fast forward to last week, and guess who shows up at my apartment? Jack. I don't live with James yet, but that's changing soon. Jack looked way too put together, like he was trying way too hard to impress. I asked, "What do you want?" He said, "I just want to talk. I'm so sorry for everything. Sarah and I are getting divorced. I found out she was cheating the whole time we were married. I don't expect you to take me back, but I think we need closure for both of us." I just blinked at him. He must have lost his mind. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Closure? You made your bed, Jack. Did you really think her golden hoo-ha that's seen more action than a Holiday Inn was going to change just because you slapped a ring on it? You're even dumber than I thought. I forgive nothing, want nothing, and you mean nothing to me. I'm better off now, and that's how it'll always be. You can go to hell." I turned, locked the door, and called my landlady. She's the sweetest old lady who knows all about my past. Jack was still hanging around in the hallway, and within minutes, her 2 nephews, who helped maintain the apartment, were there letting him know he wasn't welcome and was now banned from the property. They warned him that if he came back, the police would be called. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. My work schedule is a pretty chill 9 to 5 now, and most nights I head to the restaurant where James works. I hang out, keep out of the way, and enjoy the moments we get together. I've made friends with the staff, many of whom are James and Jack's family, and it feels like the family I always wanted. So the next night, I'm at the restaurant when Jack walks in and just sits at my table. It's a slow Tuesday, so it's not busy. James noticed immediately, recognizing him from the pictures I'd shown him. He walked over and asked if everything was okay. Jack stuck out his hand, trying to play nice. James just looked at it and then asked me, "Want me to kick him out?" I replied, "Not yet. I have a question or two." Jack's eyes lit up like he thought he was winning something. What a tool. I looked Ryan in the eye and asked him to explain what happened between him and Sarah. I'll admit it was pure morbid curiosity, and I was secretly hoping she got screwed over in the divorce. Ryan sighed and said she was having at least 2 affairs with married men. Old habits die hard, I guess. This started 2 years in. It was a tough time for me. I couldn't help but roll my eyes and interrupted, "Come on, Ryan, you're not that naive. Did you at least protect yourself, or did she get half of your stuff?" Ryan smirked and said, "I stuck it out almost another year so I could stash away some savings and sell off assets. In the end, she got way less than she could have." I nodded, then asked, "And what happened to her after that?" Ryan replied, She had to move back in with your parents. Feeling satisfied, I leaned back and said, "That's all I needed to hear. You can go now." James, ever the protector, chimed in. "You heard her. Out of my restaurant." Ryan started to protest, but no, I want to. I cut him off. No forgiveness, no closure. I just wanted to know my loser sister is back living at home. Now get out. James stood up and pointed towards the door. Ryan glanced around, seeing the glares from the bartender and 2 waitstaff members. Defeated, he tucked his tail and headed toward the exit. James added, "And if you ever come back?" Ryan quickly interjected, Yeah, I know, cops, trespassing." After he left, everyone around checked on me, which was sweet but also kind of embarrassing. James's family, who I absolutely adore, called to insist I stay with him for the next few days just to be safe. It was the kind of care I never got from my own family, and it meant a lot to me. I haven't heard from Ryan since, and I'm hoping I never do. Hey everyone, I didn't think I'd be back with another update, but here we are. First, a bit about me. I'm now a 41-year-old mom of 2 boys, 6M and 2M. James and I are doing great. I work part-time as an office manager for the restaurants and spend the rest of my time as a semi-stay-at-home mom. 3 years ago, James's cousin bought into the business and we opened a second location. It's been a lot of work, but with the 3 of them deeply involved, both places are thriving and they all get some personal time. Funny enough, I'm pretty sure I got pregnant staying with James after my last post, when his parents insisted I stay with him for safety. They joke it was part of their plan to become grandparents all along. Now, on to the recent drama. After Ryan tracked me down, I figured it was just a matter of time before my parents or sisters showed up. It didn't happen immediately, though. I started to relax a bit, feeling secure with my support system, and I rejoined social media. I stayed no contact with most of my family, including extended relatives, but I knew they'd find me if they tried. Not long after our first son was born, I got my first message. It was from my mom. She gave a half-hearted apology, mumbled something about forgiveness, and inquired about her grandson. I was going to block her, but the idea that she thought my child was her grandchild really ticked me off, so I replied, "You don't have any grandchildren. I'm not your daughter, and my kids have no relation to you. If you want grandkids, maybe you should encourage Sarah to get out there and do what she does best." Then I blocked her. She kept making new accounts and trying to contact me, but I just ignored or deleted all her attempts. Recently, though, things escalated. I was bombarded with messages and requests, mostly sob stories about missing out on the grandkids and wanting to make amends. I had zero interest in reconnecting, so I didn't respond. Then, Sarah started reaching out to me. Her messages were vague, just expressing a desire to talk. This went on for about 3 weeks before I agreed to a Zoom meeting. It was just me, no kids involved. When the call started, they immediately began asking to see the kids. I firmly shut that down. My boys have 3 grandparents, James's mom, dad, and grandma, and that's it. As the conversation went on, it became clear this wasn't just about seeing the kids. Sarah looked awful, and my parents seemed worn out and tired. They all started apologizing for everything that had happened. Even Sarah said she was wrong and wished she could have her sister back. It was almost laughable. Then my mom launched into her usual spiel about family sticking together and supporting each other. When she finished, I just stared at them and said, "Is that all? If so, I'm going to go now." They yelled for me to wait, and that's when the facade dropped. The real reason for their sudden interest was about to come out. Turns out, Sarah's been dealing with health problems for the last couple of years. For some reason, her kidneys are failing, and she's in desperate need of a transplant. That's why they were so persistent in trying to get in touch with me. Family members are the most likely to be viable donors. I looked at them and asked bluntly, "So that's why you called me? You want me to save her after everything she did? My husband wasn't enough? Now she needs a piece of me too?" My mom snapped. "Stop being like this. That was all a long time ago." She started to choke up, tears streaming down her face. "I know you hate us, but she's going to die if she doesn't get a transplant soon. Is that what you want? I know you think she wronged you in the worst way, but can't we set that aside just this once?" I stayed quiet, waiting to see if they'd say anything more. Finally, my dad spoke up. Look, we're sorry for everything that happened, but we're dealing with a lot right now. Between Sarah's medical bills and her not being able to work, your mom and I are struggling too. We're getting older, and we have our own issues. We need you to come back to Missouri to see if you're a match, and we could use some help too, or we might lose the house. So you need my kidney and my money, I said plainly. Don't put it like that, he replied. Sarah jumped in. Please, just come home. I need my big sister. I don't want to die. Can you just see if you're a match? If you're not, we'll never contact you again. I told them I'd think about it and do some research, and I'd let them know tomorrow. I ended the call and went to talk to James. He told me he'd support me no matter what decision I made and asked if we should all go together as a family or if he should come with me. I said no to both. I was going, but I was going alone. I told my former family that I would get tested in Minnesota, and if I was a match, I'd come back to Missouri and then we could discuss the rest. About a week later, the results came back, and it turned out Sarah and I were a perfect match. I agreed to come back to St. Charles. By the time I arrived, Sarah's condition had worsened and she was admitted to the hospital. This got everyone off my back about meeting up for dinner, which was fine by me. I had no intention of spending any social time with them. And of course, my parents kept hinting about needing help with their financial issues whenever they had a moment alone with me. Sarah's condition stabilized, and I met with the doctors who would perform the transplant. They explained everything, and I asked to have the conversation in front of everyone. We all gathered in Sarah's room. My parents were already there. The doctor explained that without a transplant, Sarah had maybe 6 months left. They walked us through the procedure and emphasized how I was a near-perfect match. The chances of finding someone better were slim. They stressed that the sooner we scheduled the surgery, the better. I walked over to Sarah, took her hand, and looked straight into her eyes. Did you hear that? I'm the perfect match. I'm basically the only person who can save you, and I'm not going to. You're the most vile, narcissistic piece of gutter trash I've ever known. I came here so you'd know that the one person who could save you is the one you wronged the most, and now you're paying for that with your life. You're going to die, Sarah. You should make peace with that. Sarah broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, and my parents turned on me, yelling. The doctor and nurse just stood there, stunned. I looked at my parents and said, don't even think about talking to me. And don't you ever dare ask me for anything, ever again. The only money I'd ever spend on you would be for your funerals, on the condition that you be cremated and the ashes given to me. And then I'll dump them into the filthiest porta-john I can find. With that, I walked out of the room and never looked back. Now I'm back home, my real home, with my real family, and I couldn't be happier. Now on to the next story. My sister chose her absent, deadbeat biological father to walk her down the aisle instead of the man who actually raised her. In the end, none of them showed up to the wedding. I don't even know how to start talking about the complete mess that was my half-sister Nicole's 27F wedding this past weekend. For context, I'm 16, and Nicole and I are kind of close, but there's a big age gap between us. Let me backtrack so all of this makes sense. My mom, Karen 51 Fifth, was married to this deadbeat named Gary for about 5 years. He's Nicole's dad. They split up when she was just 3 years old. He was kind of in and out of her life until she turned 7, and then he just vanished. Around the same time, my mom started dating my dad, Mike, 51 Fifth, and they got married when Nicole was 7. I showed up about 4 years later. I've always admired Nicole, even though we're not super tight. She was always kind to me, but with the 11-year gap, we never really hung out much, and my parents didn't make her babysit me. She went off to college when I was 7, so while we're close-ish, I feel like we could have been closer if we weren't so far apart in age. So all of this is based on what my mom has told me about Gary. She said when they were dating in college, Gary seemed like a great guy. They got married in a big wedding during their senior year, which Gary's dad paid for. My mom says that even though Gary liked to party and smoke weed back then, he worked really hard in school. My mom was pretty into the party scene too, so it all just kind of worked. But things took a turn after they graduated. Turns out the only reason Gary worked so hard in college was that it was a requirement for him to get his inheritance. Gary's dad is loaded. He didn't get the money right away, though. Gary's dad made it clear that if Gary and his brothers had a degree and a family, they'd get their trust funds when they hit 30 or 40 or something like that. So Gary had the degree and was married to my mom, but after college, he didn't even try to find a real job. My mom got a good one right away, but Gary just drifted between jobs, living off my mom's income while smoking pot all day, and was fixated on having a kid. A year into their marriage, my mom got pregnant with Nicole, and that's when Gary completely checked out. My mom got a promotion around the same time, which was lucky because Gary couldn't be trusted alone with Nicole, so she had to pay for daycare even though Gary was home all day. It seemed like he'd hit his life goal and was just biding his time until he could cash in on his dad's deal. My mom tried to push him to do something, but he never budged, so she finally had enough and divorced him. Over the next few years, he was a terrible dad, missing scheduled visits, dropping Nicole off early, having no food in the house, and constantly asking my mom for money. She usually gave it to him because she didn't want Nicole to go without. When Nicole was 7, my mom married my dad, Mike. From what I've seen, Nicole and my dad have always had a good relationship. My mom let Mike be the fun parent with her, not so much with me, but that's another story. Still, there were a few times when he had to step up and be the bad guy. He coached her sports teams, took her dress shopping, and was generally involved in her life. Nicole even started calling him Dad, and for most of her life, that's who he was. In the 18 years Gary was gone, he only sent her 2 birthday cards. One when she was 8, probably the first year after he left, and another one when she was 14, which arrived almost 2 months late. So for Nicole, my dad was her only real dad. But then, 2 years ago, Gary popped back up. Gary was around for about 6 months, trying to reconnect with Nicole, and for whatever reason, she let him back in, but just as quickly, he ghosted her again for another 6 months. A year ago, Gary reappeared and actually stuck around this time. He seems clean and sober now. Nicole's been including him in all the wedding plans, which has annoyed my parents since Gary has been nothing but opinionated without contributing financially. My parents have footed the bill for everything. To make things worse, Nicole started calling my dad stepdad when we're around other people, even though she still calls him dad when it's just us. As the wedding got closer, this really started to bother my parents. Nicole wouldn't clarify who she wanted to do things like walk her down the aisle, have the father-daughter dance, or give a speech. She kept saying she'd decide at the rehearsal dinner. My mom kept reminding her of Gary's absence and my dad's presence in her life. But Nicole didn't seem to get the mess going into the wedding. I knew my parents were going to be mad because it was obvious Nicole was planning to split these big moments between Gary and my dad. We got to the rehearsal dinner on Thursday, everyone was gathered, and Nicole started going over who would be doing what during the wedding. That's when she dropped the bomb. She wanted Gary to do all the traditional father roles. I saw the hurt on my dad's face and the fury on my mom's, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. My mom stood up and said, "Why would you choose him for any of that? He's barely been around." The room went dead silent. After a moment, Nicole said, "We've missed so much time together, and I want to start making memories now. I don't see why you have to make this a thing. It's important to me to have these moments with my real father." Then my mom dropped the real bombshell. If you want your real father, you should be choosing Mike, because he is your real father. Nicole, now crying, looked confused and said, "What are you talking about?" That's when my dad pulled out some folded up papers. They were results from a paternity test taken when Nicole was 3 years old. The papers clearly showed that my dad was actually her biological father. Gary grabbed a copy, his face turning red with rage, and shouted, "What the hell is this, you lying bitch?" My mom shot back, "Oh, please. The second we graduated, I knew you were a worthless loser, and you've proven me right time and again. You've been nothing but a fake, wasting years of my life. I've got my reasons for everything that's happened, and I don't owe you any explanations, Gary. You never noticed or figured out a thing anyway. God, I can't stand you. If you had just stayed gone, everything would have been fine. Now you've got no reason to stick around. Go crawl back into whatever gutter you came from and drink yourself into oblivion." At this point, Nicole and her fiancé stormed out, with Nicole in tears. The rest of the guests sat in shock, and Gary was boiling over. He charged at my mom and dad, but it was a terrible move. Gary's about 5'10", with the body of a guy who's been drinking and smoking his whole life, while my dad's a solid 6'3", and built like he spent the last 30 years in the gym. The slap my dad gave Gary was like a thunderclap. It literally knocked him off his feet. And yes, you read that right. It was just a slap. Gary stayed down, stunned, and defeated. My dad calmly told him, "Don't try that again, or next time I won't be so nice." After that, my parents came over and asked if I could ride home with my grandparents since they needed some time alone. I told them that was fine. I didn't hear anything else until the next day. Gary disappeared again, and no one has seen him since. My parents called to let me know they wouldn't be at the wedding. They said they had talked to Nicole and she was a wreck. She'd asked them not to come, and my parents understood. They didn't want to make things worse. The wedding did go on Saturday. I ended up walking Nicole down the aisle, and most of the guests still showed up. The only ones missing were a few of Gary's relatives and my parents. The ceremony itself was nice, but you could see the sadness in Nicole's eyes. She tried to enjoy the day, but it was clear she was struggling. They left for their honeymoon the next day, and I stayed with my grandparents while everything was happening. I got back home today, and my parents said they'd answer any questions I had. I'm not even sure what I want to know at this point. Everything just feels so messed up. I hope I'll get the chance to update everyone once Nicole gets back. I know this isn't the update everyone was hoping for, but Nicole's still away on her honeymoon. I finally mustered up the courage to ask my parents about what happened at the rehearsal dinner. For those who guessed money was involved, you hit the nail on the head. After a year of marriage, with Gary doing nothing, my mom told him she wanted a divorce. Gary knew his dad wouldn't give him anything if he got divorced, at least not right away. He begged my mom to stay until he got his inheritance. Then they'd split and she'd get half. My mom agreed, but mentally checked out of the marriage. She started going out more, and that's when she met my dad, Mike, and began seeing him behind Gary's back. I asked why all the secrecy if they were both just in it for the money. My mom said it was because if she got caught cheating, Gary could use that as an excuse to divorce her without his dad cutting him off. My mom admitted she messed up and got pregnant by my dad. I asked her if Gary would have figured it out, considering they were just faking the marriage. She said, "This is probably too much info, but once I knew I was pregnant, I had to, do what I had to do to keep up the act." When Nicole was born, Gary's name went on the birth certificate. My mom stuck it out for 3 years, hoping they'd get the inheritance money, but eventually she'd had enough and divorced him. She didn't give up on the idea entirely, though. Knowing Gary was a total screw-up who'd likely never get his life together, she decided to keep pretending that Nicole was his daughter, hoping Nicole could eventually get the money. My mom said this turned into a long con, which I'm pretty sure she just said to sound cool. I know she picked up that term from watching too much Lost. Luckily, Gary's dad was not the grandparent type. He didn't want to be around Nicole at all. Mom said he was one of those children should be seen, not heard kind of guys. So she kept sending him pictures and letters about all of Nicole's accomplishments, even after Gary disappeared from our lives. It took another 8 years, but she eventually convinced him, who by then had completely given up on Gary, to give Gary's share of the inheritance to Nicole. That amounted to $350,000. By the time Nicole was 15, Gary's dad was still around, and my mom worried about possible legal trouble if the truth came out, so she never told anyone. Gary had been gone for 8 years, and Nicole had developed a strong bond with OUR dad. She'd been calling him dad for years by then. Mom admits she was wrong not to tell Nicole, but given everything, she thought things were fine and didn't want to mess that up. Every penny of the money went towards Nicole. It covered her 4.5 years of college, grad school, a new car when she graduated high school, her rent after she moved out of the dorms, and a monthly allowance. The rest was used for her wedding and honeymoon. My parents do well financially, but were not rich by any means. Gary's dad passed away about 2.5 years ago, and that's when Gary tried to claim his inheritance, only to find out it had already been given to Nicole. That's when he showed up for those 6 months, trying to reconnect with her. After about half a year, he asked my mom about the money, and she told him it was gone. That's when he disappeared again, and my mom hoped it was for good. Since it had been so long, she decided to let the lie stand. She regrets it now, but didn't want to disrupt the family's peace. But Gary came back and hung around all last year. He wouldn't leave. And Nicole kept getting closer to him. My mom kept hoping he'd screw up again and disappear, but it never happened. When Nicole started pushing my dad aside, it really hurt them. They both admitted they made a bad call, but felt desperate to get Gary out of the picture. They hoped Nicole would pick my dad for the father roles, and when she didn't, they dropped the truth bomb. They regret how things went down at the wedding and not telling her sooner, but they know they can't change the past. They're committed to making it up to her when she gets back and asked me to keep being a supportive brother. I know this might not be the update everyone was hoping for, but Nicole's still on her honeymoon. It took me a few days, but I finally worked up the courage to ask my parents about what happened at the rehearsal dinner. For those who guessed it was about money, congrats, you got it right. After a year of marriage and with Gary doing absolutely nothing, my mom told him she wanted a divorce. Gary knew his dad would never give him anything if he got divorced, at least not anytime soon. He begged my mom to stick around until he got the inheritance, then they'd split and she'd get half. She agreed, but mentally checked out of the marriage. That's when she started going out and met my dad, Mike, seeing him behind Gary's back. When I asked why all the secrecy if they were just in it for the money, she said it was because if she got caught cheating, Gary might have grounds to divorce her without angering his dad and losing his inheritance. My mom admitted she messed up when she got pregnant by my dad. I asked her if Gary would have figured out Nicole wasn't his, considering they were faking the whole marriage. She replied, "This is probably too much information, but once I found out I was pregnant, I did what I had to do." Gross, I know. When Nicole was born, Gary's name went on the birth certificate. My mom stuck around for 3 years, hoping to get the inheritance money, but eventually she'd had enough and divorced him. She didn't completely give up, though. She knew Gary was a total mess and likely wouldn't ever get his act together. So if she could keep up the charade that Nicole was his daughter, there was a chance Nicole could still get the money. My mom said it was a long con, though she only used that term because she picked it up from watching Lost. Thankfully, Gary's dad wasn't involved as a grandparent. He didn't want anything to do with Nicole. Mom said he was the type who thought kids should be seen and not heard. She kept sending him pictures and letters about Nicole's accomplishments, even after Gary disappeared. It took about 8 more years, but she eventually convinced him, who by then had completely given up on his son, to give Gary's inheritance share to Nicole. That ended up being $350,000. Nicole was 15 when this happened, and Gary's dad was still alive. My mom was terrified of legal trouble if the truth ever came out, so she kept quiet. By then, Gary had been out of the picture for 8 years, and Nicole and our dad had really bonded. She'd been calling him dad for a long time. Mom admits she was wrong not to tell Nicole at some point, but with how things were going, she didn't want to disrupt anything. The entire sum went toward Nicole. It covered her 4.5 years of college, grad school, a brand new car when she graduated high school, her rent when she moved off campus, and a monthly allowance for whatever she wanted. The remaining funds went to her wedding and honeymoon. My parents do well financially, but were far from wealthy. About 2.5 years ago, Gary's dad passed away. Mom knew that Gary tried to claim his inheritance, only to find out it had already gone to Nicole. That was when he resurfaced for 6 months, trying to reconnect with her. Eventually, Gary asked Mom about the money, and she told him it was all spent. That's when he vanished again, and Mom hoped it was the last time they'd hear from him. Since so much time had passed, she decided to let the lie rest, figuring it wasn't worth disrupting everyone's peace. But then Gary came back and wouldn't leave, hanging around for the entire year. Nicole kept growing closer to him, and Mom kept hoping he'd screw up or disappear, but that never happened. When Nicole started pushing my dad aside, it really bothered them. They both admit they made poor choices, but were desperate to get Gary out of the picture. They had hoped Nicole would choose my dad for the fatherly roles at the wedding, and when she didn't, they felt like they had no choice but to reveal everything. They regret how things unfolded at the wedding and not telling Nicole sooner, but they know there's no undoing it now. They're committed to making things right when Nicole gets back and ask me to keep being a supportive brother. Now, on to the next story. My fiancé keeps pushing me to show off party tricks when we're with friends, and is insisting that I perform at our wedding, too. I've been lurking around enough to know that the big question people ask is how long we've been together. I met my fiancé, let's call him James, back in college, and we started dating right after graduation. Recently, I got promoted to a job with different hours, which gave me a chance to revisit an old hobby from high school, practicing aerial silks. My new hours let me leave work in time to hit the studio before it closes. I'd been keeping up with some gym conditioning over the years, so I wasn't starting from scratch, but still, I was rusty. Ever since James came to watch one of my practices, though, I've noticed a change in him. This summer, we were invited to a graduation party, and one of the games involved doing a little party trick for a prize. Without any warning, James volunteered me and asked me to do a split. Everyone was staring at me, and I felt trapped. To give you some background, I had recently skipped a recital at my studio because I wasn't feeling ready. I told James that I was self-conscious, partly because I was out of practice, and partly because I was trying to lose some weight. He knew all this, so when he put me on the spot at the party, I was overwhelmed. I quietly told him I didn't want to, but he kept encouraging people to cheer me on, which made me even more anxious. I ended up in tears and ran to the bathroom, and he followed to apologize once the crowd moved on. James wasn't always like this. It all started after that practice he came to watch, and a few weeks before the graduation party, he began asking me to do flexible poses in bed. At first, I didn't mind, but ever since that practice, his requests have increased, and he's been unusually persistent, even when I've said no. I've tried to tell him that I'm okay with trying some poses sometimes, but that doesn't mean every time. After the party, we talked, and I told him how much it hurt when he put me on the spot like that. He apologized and promised to stop asking, but then he brought up something else that made me question if he really understood. He said he wanted to respect my boundaries, but then asked if I could perform aerial silks at our wedding. He'd been watching YouTube videos of weddings where performers do silks routines, and he thought it would be great if I did the same. I told him no, explaining that it wasn't the right time or place and I didn't want to end up sweaty and having to change clothes. Plus, those videos were of hired performers, not brides. I hadn't even told my family and friends I was back into silks because I wanted to build up my confidence first. But James kept pushing, saying it would help me overcome my fears. Even after I said no, he told me to think about it and that he'd keep asking. That really bothered me. I'm not ready, and he doesn't seem to get that. Since coming to my practice, he's been pushy about this whole performance idea, and it's turning me off. I just don't know how to move forward. He said he'd stop pushing for new poses in bed to give me space, but he also said sometimes we need a little push to get over our fears. I'm honestly thinking about calling things off because he won't back down about me performing, even after I said no multiple times. Edit. I'm really close to ending things. Our first serious talk was when I opened up about not feeling ready to perform at the studio recital. The second was after the graduation party, where he apologized and we discussed his behavior in bed. He promised to stop, and for a while he did. But now he's latched onto the wedding performance idea, saying it's for my own good, and he won't take no for an answer. He's even looked into renting a silks rig for the wedding, despite me telling him I'm not interested. That was my breaking point. After my post, I confronted James and laid it all out. I told him how he's changed since he saw my practice and how I've felt like an object ever since. I explained that after months of him ignoring my boundaries, I was done. But he said I was being unreasonable because he had given me the space I asked for. I told him I never asked for space, and then he tried to justify his behavior by asking what we'd do if our future kids never learned to step out of their comfort zones. I told him that was irrelevant. The real issue was that he ignored me repeatedly, and he accused me of being unfair. Then he dropped another bombshell. He had downloaded some photos from an old Facebook page I used for silks and posted them to encourage me, without telling me. I didn't even know until he mentioned it. James said he wanted to encourage me, telling me I was better than I thought. And then he showed me an Instagram account I didn't know he had. It wasn't his main account. It was mostly for memes under a random name that didn't connect to him personally, but he said some of his friends followed it. As he scrolled through, I noticed he'd posted pictures from my high school and college performances, images he downloaded without asking for my permission. He had written captions about how I was struggling with confidence, showing me positive comments from followers. But there were also a few lewd comments from strangers that he quickly scrolled past, and I was upset because he never got my consent to post any of it. I'd been planning to share my Silk's comeback on my own social media after my first recital, but I hadn't even gotten there yet. Instead, he told people I was back at it and said he wanted to show me these posts for encouragement closer to our wedding date. James argued that I was being unfair because this was a part of me that he found attractive, and he said I should be willing to do more in bed. I told him how he wasn't like this before I got back into Silks, but after seeing my practice, he's been a completely different person. He even admitted that he'd gotten off to some of the photos he posted, but said he'd rather do it with me. That was the last straw, especially knowing some of those pictures were from my high school days. Right now, I'm planning to move in temporarily with a girlfriend who's helping me out. Meanwhile, James, my ex-fiancé, has been making posts about how I'm unreasonable and upset with him for supporting me with Silks. He's been claiming that I'm projecting my insecurities onto him, conveniently leaving out all the pressure he put on me about sex and performing at our wedding. I asked him to take down the photos, but he flat out refused. It feels like a complete invasion of privacy. I spoke to my parents about everything, and while they were happy to hear I'd started Silks again, they were also really upset at James's behavior. My dad's especially angry and is trying to find a way to get the photos removed, though we're not sure how much can be done. My mom thinks that me getting back into Silks triggered something in him that was always there, because he knew I did it in the past. It's been overwhelming, and I've decided to take a break from Silks and possibly work for a while. I'm grateful to some aerialists and circus performers who reached out with advice, and sadly, they said it's not uncommon to encounter people who sexualize the art rather than appreciate the skills and hard work behind it. Hey everyone, just wanted to update and say that this community has been a great support. I'm hoping to get back into Silk soon, but it's been stressful since the breakup. James has been spiteful and still refuses to take down the photos. I reported some of the pictures he stole from my old circus Instagram, and my parents reported them too. Some got removed, but now he's posting the images on one of his meme Twitter accounts. He's even uploaded some photos I didn't know he had, probably from a downloader or screenshots he took. I made my circus Instagram private for now, even though I don't want it to be. It's meant for sharing my progress and sometimes serves as a resume for gigs. My dad suggested legal action for 2 reasons. One, because James posted photos of me when I was younger, including some with other kids in the background. And 2, because James admitted he was getting off to my pictures even after we broke up. That really messed with me, especially since he didn't say which age I was in the photos he used. Dad encouraged me to bring this to the authorities because he thinks there might be something more going on, especially since James keeps uploading new pictures despite my page being private. The reason I haven't done it right away is that my dad advised talking to a lawyer first, and I've been seeing a therapist as well. My therapist has been helping me sort through all this. I've hit a bit of a delay in going back to my Silk studio, not just because of the photos, but also due to the possibility of something darker at play. Some of my younger photos from high school also had other kids in them, and I'm considering reporting James not just for my peace of mind, but because it feels like the right thing to do. Dad's already spoken with a lawyer about the photos of me as a minor and the ones that include other kids. I just can't stand how some people like James sexualize everything and fail to see the art and effort behind it. He made a comment before I moved out saying the only reason people cheer when girls do splits and not other moves is because they're opening their legs. He's insulted me a lot since then, and it still makes me angry just thinking about it. I'm working with my therapist to move past all this, and I'm hoping to return to Silks sometime this year. I truly appreciate the support from this community and the advice from fellow aerialists. It's been a lifeline during this rough patch. Now, on to the next story. I'm a 17-year-old girl with celiac disease, but my new friend group thinks I'm anorexic and are planning to stage an intervention. A little background. My parents split when I was just a kid. I lived with my mom most of the year, but every summer I had to go stay with my dad. I dreaded going to my dad's place. Part of it was because he was stubborn and rude, always insisting things had to be his way. But there was something else too. Every time I went to his house, I'd get really sick, like violently ill. I'd have nausea, rashes, cramps, and as I got older, I even started missing my periods. Sorry if that's TMI. I went to see a doctor, but he told me it was probably all in my head, stress stuff, and suggested therapy. My dad didn't believe in therapy, said it was a waste of time, so he refused to take me. My mom managed to get me to a therapist a few times, but by then the symptoms had eased up, so it didn't seem to help much. One thing that really got on my nerves was my dad's diet. He lived off junk food and soda, and he'd mock me if I tried to eat anything healthy. I think it reminded him too much of my mom, who's a total health nut. I'd sneak in some carrots or something, and if he found them, he'd toss them out like they were trash. At my mom's, I ate vegetables, organic chicken, stuff that made me feel okay. Sometimes a food would make me sick, so I'd just avoid it and move on. I started saying no to any food I wasn't sure about, and I'd just tell people I was a picky eater to avoid the hassle. When I was 16, a new girl moved to our school. We became friends, and after a while, I noticed she avoided the same foods I did. I mentioned it offhand, like, isn't that kind of weird? She got serious and told me she had celiac disease and that I should get tested. I took her advice, and sure enough, I had it too. Everything finally made sense. I was so relieved to finally know what was going on that I told everyone I knew, friends, classmates, anyone who'd listen. But they didn't react like I expected. They played along at first, but soon they started distancing themselves from me. When I confronted my closest friend, she admitted they thought I was faking it for attention because they'd only heard of gluten-free diets as some trendy fad. I broke down and told her about all the hell I went through at my dad's house and how hurt I was that she didn't believe me. She was horrified and immediately became my biggest supporter, but the rest of the group still thought I was full of it. We decided it was best to cut ties with them. My birthday's in August, so I still had to endure 2 more summers at my dad's after getting diagnosed. He took the news worse than my old friends did. He'd yell that I thought I was better than him, accuse me of making up illnesses just to be special, and flat out refuse to believe anything my doctor said. It got so bad he'd mess with my food on purpose and curse me out when I got sick. Because of all this, I've become really cautious about telling people about my disease. My experiences and hearing people joke about gluten-free diets on TV and online have made me hesitant. I know it's not brave, but I'm terrified of how people will react. I've been burned before, and it still stings. This is my last summer with my dad, and I'm counting down the days. Once these next few weeks are over, I'm done with him for good. I know you might suggest leaving or calling CPS, but I've already decided it's easier to just stick it out and never look back. So please, let's not focus on that part. Here's where I need your advice. My best friend and I have found a new group of friends, and they're awesome. We play role-playing games together every weekend and have been hanging out since May. There's about 10 or 11 of them, depending on if you count this one guy who doesn't show up regularly. Yesterday, my best friend, let's call her Laura, pulled me aside and told me that the group had been talking behind my back. They noticed I never eat much and seem really picky, plus I've lost weight and haven't been looking great thanks to living with my dad. They've concluded that I have anorexia and are planning an intervention next weekend. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I'm scared to tell them the truth because I'm terrified they won't believe me. They've already made up their minds and I've lost friends over this before. I can't handle more people thinking I'm lying. This disease has already taken so much from me, and I just wanted one part of my life that wasn't overshadowed by it. How do I explain it to them in a way they'll believe? I'm afraid of getting rejected again. I don't know if I can take it. Update. Thanks for all your advice. The intervention was yesterday, and I wanted to let you know how it went. A few hours before our game, one of the guys, let's call him Zach, texted me asking me to come over early because he wanted to discuss some game stuff. I suspected this was really the intervention and texted Laura to see if she was invited too. She wasn't, so I asked her to come with me. Before heading to Zach's house, I decided to try something a little bold, thanks to a suggestion from one of the comments on my last post. Shout out to /u/I-HavoCharge. I swung by my favorite gluten-free Chinese spot and picked up some of their incredible vegetable fried rice. It's my go-to comfort food. They're super careful about cross-contamination, and I've never gotten sick from eating there, even after years. I brought the food along with me to Zach's house, along with Laura and my stuff for our game. dice, notebooks, the usual. Zach looked surprised when he saw Laura with me. I asked him if it was an issue, saying that if we were going to chat about some of the game details, she should be involved because of her role. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid drowning you in game lingo. He hesitated but said it was fine. I then asked, "Mind if I eat while we talk? I missed lunch and I'm starving," and I pulled out my Chinese food. He said sure, but looked pretty uneasy, like he wasn't expecting it. As I started eating, Zach began his spiel. /you/health help celiac, I didn't actually ask you here to talk about game stuff. A few of us have noticed some things lately and we're worried. They kind of nominated me to bring it up. I just said, okay, and waited. He started listing off all the things that had them concerned, how they never saw me eat, how I seemed sickly and was losing weight, and how I always got weird when food came up. Then he dropped the big one. Michael's older sister is anorexic, and she acts a lot like you. We think you might be anorexic too. I took a deep breath, swallowed my food, and tried to stay calm. I'm not anorexic, I told him. Zach kept talking, saying stuff like, nobody ever thinks they're anorexic, and it just went on and on. I could see where this was heading, so I cut him off. I do have a problem, but it's not what you think. Can I explain? He agreed, but I could tell he was worried about what I'd say, like he was bracing himself for me to admit something about my weight or body image. Here's what I said, more or less. I know I'm losing weight, and it's not healthy, but it's not intentional. I have a disease called celiac, which means my body can't handle certain grains like wheat, barley, or rye. When I eat them, it messes up my stomach and makes me really sick, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect, like with rashes or muscle cramps. It's not just an allergy. It does lasting damage. So when I turn down food, it's because most of what you guys offer, like Doritos or PB&Js, would seriously mess me up. Lately, my symptoms have been worse because I'm living with my dad, who doesn't believe in my diagnosis and sabotages my meals. I'm not trying to starve myself. I'm just trying to avoid getting really sick. Zach fumbled around, pulling out actual note cards. He had a whole script prepared for the intervention. Classic RPG drama at its finest. He took a moment to process everything and then asked me a few questions. But why do you say no to stuff like Coke? Because Coke's gross, but I didn't want to be a hassle and ask you guys to buy root beer just for me. Why didn't you just tell us this sooner? Laura jumped in here and explained what went down with our last friend group and why I was hesitant. Okay, so what could you eat right now that I probably have in the house? I just stared at him for a second, half amused and half annoyed. I asked if he was serious, and he nodded. So I started guessing. Do you have celery? Nope. How about yogurt? Nope. Apple? Still no. Seriously? I said, frustrated. Finally, I asked, got any plain popcorn, like air-popped popcorn? That he had, so I ate some popcorn in front of him, and that seemed to convince him I wasn't lying. We awkwardly shifted back to game talk until the rest of the group started showing up. When Michael arrived, Zach pulled him aside for a chat, trying to be discreet, but not really succeeding. They kept looking my way, and I could hear bits of their conversation. Michael asked if I'd been defensive, and Zach shrugged and said, not really. To drive the point home, I just kept munching on my popcorn through the whole game. Later, Michael texted me, apologizing for jumping to conclusions and asking what snacks he could keep around that I'd actually eat. I'll be honest, I teared up a bit. I was so scared they'd kick me out, but instead they immediately moved to make things easier for me. They're good people. So yeah, it all worked out in the end. Sorry if that wasn't the dramatic ending you expected. Now, on to the next story. My 32-year-old husband has been secretly destroying my houseplants by adding bleach to them. I've always been passionate about houseplants. My mom had a huge love for them, and I guess it rubbed off on me. I've kept plants my whole life, and I've gotten pretty good at it too. Some of my plants were even gifts from my sister, and a few of them were pretty expensive. But something strange has been happening these last 6 months. It wasn't a lack of light or forgetting to water them. It wasn't nutrient issues or root rot either. They just died. Quickly. At first, I tried not to let it get to me too much. I mean, plants die sometimes. That's just how it goes, right? Plus, none of the really pricey ones had died. Well, until recently. My sister got me this beautiful Monstera albo for my birthday about 2 months ago. It had 5 leaves and it was fully rooted. It was stunning. But today, as I sat there unpotting it, crying my eyes out, I was looking over the roots really closely. I wanted to figure out what went wrong. Was it a pest issue? And that's when I noticed something weird. There was a smell, a bleach smell. I sniffed the potting mix, and sure enough, it reeked of bleach. The only other adult who could have been messing with my plants was my husband. I didn't get a chance to talk to him right away. It was a few hours before I could ask him, but when I did, I stayed calm. I asked him, point blank, if he had done something to my plants. At first, he denied it, but I mentioned the bleach smell in the potting mix from the albo my sister gave me, and he eventually caved. He admitted to adding small amounts of bleach to the fertilizer water I had been using. I broke down crying. I asked him, why? Why would you do this? You know how much I love these plants. But he didn't really give me an answer, and he didn't really apologize either. At that moment, I felt all the trust I had in him completely disappear. I'm thinking counseling might help us work through this, but I'm the one who would have to arrange it, even though he's the one who did this. Part of me is just so angry that I want to end the relationship altogether. I know that might sound extreme since we're married and we have a child together, but right now, I don't feel safe with him. After texting back and forth, I decided to leave work early. I went straight to his office, a space I usually respect and never enter, not even to grab dirty dishes. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but after reading hundreds of comments about him possibly doing worse or already up to something else, I felt uneasy. I needed to see for myself. Once inside, I opened a drawer and found it full of my daughter's dolls, dollhouse furniture, and small toys. I had given her that dollhouse for her 4th birthday last year, and she absolutely loved it. She's always been careful with her toys, but things kept going missing, and every time my husband was the one to notice. He'd scold her about losing things, lecturing her on how she needed to be responsible, or he wouldn't let her play with the dollhouse anymore. He kept going until she'd break down in tears. Whenever I overheard this, I'd step in and tell him to go cool off. I figured he was just losing his patience. I've even told him repeatedly that this isn't the way to handle it with a child. His response was always that he wanted her to grow up responsible. But now I see it for what it was. Some kind of bizarre setup. He was taking her toys, hiding them, and then using it as an excuse to berate her until she cried. This afternoon, my sister, her husband, and his dad came over and they helped me change all the locks. I texted my husband to let him know he's not coming back. He can come by Saturday morning to pick up his essential things, but my brother-in-law and another man will be there to oversee it. Apologies if this seems a bit scattered. This post isn't really my top priority right now. I probably won't be updating again. Thank you to everyone who has expressed concern for my safety. Update. Husband, 32M, has been killing my houseplants, with bleach. How do I move forward? I've received a few messages from people checking in, so I wanted to let everyone know that my daughter and I are safe. Without diving into too many details, it feels like my husband has completely changed. Like he's ripped off some mask he was wearing all along. He's screamed at me, cursed at me, and has even gotten physical, pushing me to the ground twice and kicking me in the face. I was never afraid of him before, not like this. The police have been involved and we're in the process of getting a divorce. After a brief period of extreme anger, he just seemed to stop caring altogether. He's told me he doesn't want any custody of our daughter and even wants to give up his parental rights. He doesn't see her anymore. From what I've heard, he's already moved on and has a new girlfriend. I'm still in contact with his parents. I've always had a good relationship with his mom. One of his friends, someone he's known since college, also reached out to ask what was going on. Apparently, my husband has ghosted that whole friend group after one of them called him out on some other bad behavior. On a more positive note, although it's bittersweet, my daughter is doing so much better. It's like a weight has been lifted from her little shoulders. She's happy, she's silly, and she's thriving in ways I hadn't realized were missing before. I guess both of us have changed since he's been gone. Looking back, I can see that we were living in this tense, eggshell-walking environment. Whenever he was upset, the whole house felt infected with his mood. I didn't realize just how much we were holding our breath. I wasn't scared of physical violence before, so I don't want to make it sound worse than it was, but I was constantly on edge, never able to fully relax. Thank you to everyone who made me realize that I was like a frog sitting in a slowly boiling pot. Question: what can I do to help my daughter know that she's safe and loved always? I know I didn't protect her enough when her dad was yelling at her about the dollhouse. I stepped in every time I heard it, but it just doesn't feel like it was enough. I feel so guilty about it. She's on a waiting list for therapy, and our routine hasn't changed much, but she seems like she's thriving. Still, I worry. How do I make sure she knows she's safe with me? Now, on to the next story. My husband died, and now I have to pretend he was a great man who loved me. I'm Lisa, 36F, and my husband Ryan, 43M, passed away 3 months ago. Honestly, I was relieved when it happened. Ryan abused me financially, mentally, and even physically. When I got pregnant, he convinced me to quit my job, promising he'd take care of me. That promise turned into control. I couldn't buy anything, not even a basic cream, without his permission. Everything that was mine became his, and anything that was his stayed his. I stayed with him because I loved him at first and didn't have anywhere else to go. My self-esteem was too low to believe I could leave. By the time I stopped loving him, he'd already had his first affair. He made me believe it was my fault. After giving birth, I wasn't ready for sex, and I had stitches from the delivery. But Ryan didn't care about that. He only cared about blaming me. I was slowly planning my escape, saving whatever little money I could from working at home, selling things in secret. Ryan wouldn't let me work outside. He was too jealous for that. I wanted to save up for a lawyer. At that point, he was having another affair, this time with a close male friend of his. The affair kept him busy, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. I just wanted him as far away as possible. I could have made a scene since I knew both him and the person he was cheating with, but I stayed quiet and focused on planning my escape. Then, unexpectedly, Ryan died, and now he's being remembered as some kind of martyr. Why is it that when someone dies, all their sins are suddenly forgiven? Even my own family, who knew about his affair and how he manipulated me, are saying we shouldn't speak ill of the dead. Everyone talks about how beautiful our relationship was. His family praises him, saying he gave me and our child everything. His affair partner even hugged me at the funeral, telling me how much Ryan loved me. His friends kept saying what a great guy he was. But me? I had to stand there pretending to be sad. The day Ryan died, I cried a lot, but it wasn't out of grief. It was because I felt free. It would have taken me years to save enough to escape him. He made it clear that if I ever left, he'd take everything from me and make my life hell. He told me so every time I stood up for myself. But now, I have the house. I have everything. I'm receiving widow's benefits, and I have full custody of our child. I've started seeing a psychologist, and everyone thinks it's to cope with my grief. But it's really to heal from the abuse I suffered. Pretending to be sad at the funeral was hard, but I did it for my child. I did it because finally, it's over. I'm free. If I'd made a fuss while Ryan was alive, he and his family would have made sure I ended up with nothing. They're just like him. Now, in their eyes, I'm just the poor widow who had no idea what was going on. And I'm okay with that, because it's helping me keep what I deserve. It's been several weeks since my last post, and I didn't expect it to end up elsewhere. Honestly, I had forgotten all about it until a few days ago when Ryan's lover and friend, let's call him Seth, showed up at my house, saying he'd found my post. I was shocked. I didn't expect him to find it, and it scared me a little. But at this point, if someone shared it without my consent, there's not much I can do about it. One of my sons let him in. I hadn't heard the doorbell. I didn't want to make a scene in front of my kids, so I allowed him to come in. I was curious about what he'd say. When we were alone, Seth told me that he knew I was aware of his affair with Ryan because of the post, which he claimed to have seen on TikTok. I never posted it there, so I assumed someone else must have uploaded it. He tried to defend Ryan. He said Ryan wasn't the best husband, but he was a great friend and a hard-working man. Seth told me Ryan's family misses him and that despite his mistakes, I should let the past go. He insisted that we'd all be better off if I stopped digging into it. Seth kept pushing, and it felt intimidating. His attitude reminded me of Ryan, controlling, telling me how to behave. For the first time since Ryan's death, I felt on the verge of a panic attack in the presence of another man. It was like I was facing my husband again. I know Seth is scared that I'll tell people the truth about their affair. He's gay, and maybe he has a boyfriend now, and he's worried about what might happen if the truth comes out. For years, I was submissive. Ryan turned me into someone who always put her head down, but when Ryan died, I cried with relief. I felt free. Yet here was Seth, in my house, telling me what to do as if I were still Ryan's puppet. Seth knew what kind of abuse I suffered, but he still slept with my husband. He's the man Ryan made me cook for, the man my husband slept with while treating me like nothing more than a maid. And now this same man was in my home, telling me Ryan was a good person and that I should keep quiet. I couldn't take it. I wanted to slap him, but I was so angry that I punched him instead. In that moment, it felt like I was hitting Ryan too. I don't regret it. It felt good. I yelled at him to leave, and I told him if he didn't, I'd expose everything. He left and has been quiet since. Originally, my plan was to stay silent and move on. But that's a whole different thing from having someone like Seth come in and tell me what to do. My reaction might not have been perfect, but I'm tired of being told to shut up. I never got to stand up to Ryan, but that day, it felt like I finally did. I haven't told anyone yet, and I don't plan to, but if Seth tries anything, I won't hesitate to make a TikTok or post on Facebook and tell the whole truth. As for the house, with the current economic crisis, I doubt anyone can afford to buy it at full price. For now, my focus is on finding a better job in the future. Renting out this house could be a great way to make some money. Eventually, I'd like to buy a small piece of land, even if it's far away. I want something that's mine and my children's. My kids don't miss Ryan much, and I understand why. It took me a while to get them into child therapy, but they've started their sessions and they're doing well. I'm seeing a psychologist too. One of the best decisions I've made is cutting back on contact with Ryan's family and even my own. I've started making excuses, like saying I'm busy with work or we're not home. I still have to let Ryan's mom visit from time to time, but even my kids seem happier now that my mood has improved. I doubt many people are still interested in this, but thank you for the messages I received. Although a lot of people don't seem to understand that cultures and laws are different here, and buying a house or moving to the other side of the country in a month is impossible for most of us. Now, on to the next story. I broke the law to save someone's life and feel guilty about it. I completely understand why you can't share this story with people you know. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, weighing you down, but you can't talk about it because of what's at stake. I guess that's why you're here. So this all took place when I was in the military. I did something I'm not proud of, even though at the time I convinced myself it was the right thing. It still bothers me to this day, but I can't speak openly about it. It would drag other people into a mess, and honestly, I'd probably end up in trouble too. At the time, I was working as an ER nurse on a military base. Accidents happened all the time, especially during training. But this one was different. It was a flight incident, and those are always a big deal. Lives are lost, equipment worth millions is destroyed. That day, it was no exception. The pilot in question ejected and survived, but others weren't so lucky. And the blame, well, it was all being put on him. They brought him into the ER, and despite everything, he walked in on his own 2 feet. Physically, he seemed fine, but you could see the guilt tearing him apart. Survivor's guilt is brutal. We ran through the typical trauma procedures, x-rays, the works. I was the senior nurse on duty that day, so I was handed the responsibility for the flight incident paperwork. That also meant I had to do the chain of custody blood draw to check the pilot for any traces of drugs or alcohol in his system. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. People had died that day, and not just any people. Brothers in arms, his entire squadron, his superiors, even higher-ups, were in and out. A few of them stayed by his side the whole time. I went ahead and drew his blood. The chain of custody process is very strict, meaning every person who handles the vials has to sign off documenting each transfer. It's a legal safeguard to ensure nothing gets tampered with. For some reason, I ended up drawing more blood than needed. It's a habit of mine. Draw an extra vial or two just in case the docs need to run additional tests. Saves the patient from getting poked twice, you know? So I had 2 extra vials sitting there. And without thinking much about it, I tucked them into my pocket along with the trash. Usually I just toss them out, but that day, I don't know, I kept them on me. Didn't even think twice. After we were done, his squadron took him straight from the hospital to a nearby bar. The plan? To get wasted and start the grieving process. I'm not sure if that's typical, allowed, or even approved by the military, but honestly, I wasn't going to judge. They were trying to pull him out of the dark hole he'd fallen into. I mean, how do you go back to work knowing you were at the controls when people died? It's got to be one of the hardest things. So yeah, I wasn't going to criticize them for getting drunk. Then, not even an hour later, I got a call from the lab. There'd been a screw-up. The blood samples, patient's clean blood, had been dropped, smashed, gone. They needed me to get a new draw. Problem was, he was at the bar by now, drinking, and I had no choice but to call him back in for another test. And this time, it wouldn't be clean. There'd be alcohol in his system, no doubt about it. But I still had to do it. Everyone in that room knew exactly what was at stake. With alcohol in the pilot's blood from the second draw, he'd be court-martialed, there would be a trial, he'd face charges, and he'd end up doing time in the brig. His commanding officer came with him. Honestly, I can't remember if he was a 1-star or 2-star general, or maybe just a colonel, but his face told the story. He knew what was coming. The pilot's future was as good as done, unless he stepped up and explained the truth. That this was a second blood draw, done after the pilot had gone off duty and started drinking to drown his guilt. But doing that would mean admitting there was no initial sample on record for the incident, which would raise all kinds of red flags. Even without proof that he was under the influence during the crash, they'd ground him indefinitely. He'd have to fight tooth and nail to earn back their trust, and by then, the dream of being an elite pilot would be gone. Walking him into that room felt like walking him straight to his own execution. As I prepped everything, filling out the forms and getting ready to take his blood again, I knew what I had to do. The commanding officer stumbled through his words, trying to offer explanations, maybe hoping I had a solution, but I don't think he knew or even believed that I could actually do anything to change the outcome. No one pushed me to act. No one made any threats. It was my decision entirely, and no one had any clue what I was about to do. I took the blood sample I'd just drawn in my right hand. The pilot wouldn't even look at me. His head hung low, the weight of guilt crushing him. For the dead, for himself. It was all too much. "Look at me," I said, my voice sharp. "Look at me." I waited for him to raise his eyes to mine. He needed to understand, to see what I was about to do, to know it would be okay. "Do you remember who drew your blood earlier today? Who was it?" "Who?" I pressed him. "It was you. You did it," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. With his new blood sample in my right hand, I reached into my pocket with my left, making sure it was obvious, and pulled out the extra vials I'd kept from earlier. "This is some of the blood I drew from you before. It's yours. There was extra. This is your blood," I told him as clearly as I could. His expression wasn't blank, but he was just a split second away from fully realizing what I was saying. I glanced at him, then at his commanding officer, before turning and tossing the fresh sample, the one with alcohol in it, into the sharps container. Gone. That evidence was now nothing but garbage. I placed the vials I'd saved from earlier on the counter and started filling out the paperwork. The only thing I lied about was the time of the blood draw. I falsified that detail on the form. But that was still his blood. I'd drawn it myself, and it had never left my possession. We all knew the truth, the pilot, his CO, and me. This was the only way for him to have clean blood on record. The relief in the room was almost tangible. The pilot muttered something to his commander, but I could barely focus. I knew I'd just committed a serious crime. But the truth was, this man wasn't drunk or under the influence during the accident, nor when he first came to me. Sure, he'd had some drinks by the time of the second draw, but that wasn't the blood I used. If I'd handed over the new sample, his career would have ended, and unfairly so. I can't even recall the look on his face after it was all done, or the words they used to thank me. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and fast in my ears. I knew if anyone found out what I'd just done, I'd be the one facing time in the brig. So I waved them off, told them to get out. They couldn't leave the room looking too relieved, couldn't slap me on the back or show any sign that the weight had lifted from their shoulders. They had to exit quietly, without a fuss, so no one else would suspect what had just happened. It still bothers me, I lied. I forged an official document. I feel awful about it, even now. But the truth is, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. It was the right thing to do, even if it still eats at me sometimes. At least, getting this off my chest feels like a step toward making peace with it. Now, on to the next story. I uncovered my husband's philandering secret after he faked his own death. I need to know if I'm overreacting because this situation is already insane. Here's a quick TLDR, though it's hard to believe. I'm Sarah, 35, and I've been married to my husband Adam for 6 years. We have 2 kids, Jason, 10, and Liam, 5. 11 years ago, when Adam and I were engaged, he went missing during a trip to Thailand. He was gone for nearly 5 years and later told everyone that he'd been imprisoned in Cambodia the whole time. Right after he left for that trip, I found out I was pregnant with Jason. During those 5 years, I became really close to his family, and I eventually met and fell in love with a man named Brian, who I got engaged to. But when Adam came back, I felt torn between picking up where we'd left off or continuing my relationship with Brian. In the end, I decided to give Adam and me another shot. We got married a week later, and I was pregnant with Liam within the year. I thought our relationship was fine. We loved each other, and though Adam was a bit of a workaholic, things seemed fine. I've never been one to get professional massages. Usually I'm content with a shoulder rub from Adam. I've always thought of massages as a luxury I didn't need. But lately, Adam's been distant, and I've been stressed from work. A coworker of mine kept urging me to try out this massage place she loves, insisting that everyone there is amazing. So I finally decided to give it a shot. When I got there, the guy at the desk said they had availability and took down my info, telling me there would be a short wait. While I was waiting, I noticed a bulletin board behind the desk with 3 pictures from security footage and a note above that said, "Permanent ban." One of the pictures looked just like Adam. I kept staring at it until the desk guy asked if something was wrong. I told him, "I think I know that guy in the picture. How does someone get banned?" He explained, "Our policy is to ban anyone who asks for a happy ending." I was shocked. "People actually do that?" I asked. He nodded and said, "It's rare, but it happens, usually to the same therapist." He apologized for oversharing, but I told him not to worry about it. He said Lisa was ready for me, and I followed her down the hall. Lisa was a petite Asian American woman, and I had a hunch she was the one who kept getting these creeps. The massage was great, and we made small talk throughout. She had a total Midwestern accent, and I learned she'd worked there for about 3 years, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know the truth. So, as we were wrapping up, I came out with it. This is really hard to say, but I noticed the list of banned guys, and one of them is my husband. Were you by chance his massage therapist? Her face softened with concern as my eyes filled with tears. "All 3 of them were my clients," she said. "Which one is he?" I pointed to the man in the orange shirt, and she sighed. "Oh, yes, I'm really sorry." I started crying and apologized profusely. "I can't believe he did that to you. Did he just ask outright?" I asked. She hesitated, but told me, "This is tough to hear, but you deserve the truth. I brought him into the room just like I did with you. When I knocked, he said he was ready, but when I walked in, he was lying on the table, fully erect, holding some cash. I immediately left and called the front desk. Jake escorted him out. I felt sick. I apologized again, left her a $100 tip, and drove straight home. I was ready to leave him, but then a strange calm came over me. I needed to know how deep this went. So I acted normal when Adam came home, pretending it was just another night. After he went to bed, I went through his phone. His texts were clean, and there was no sign of Snapchat, WhatsApp, or anything else suspicious. Then I opened his Reddit account. I saw the 4 posts he made when he came back from imprisonment, which I'd read before. I was about to give up when I noticed I could switch accounts. What I found made my stomach turn. He was subscribed to multiple Asian women fetish subreddits and massage forums. The chats were even worse. Most of them were just faceless, anonymous people, probably men pretending to be women, but there was one that stood out. Someone he was definitely meeting. They had detailed conversations about where they met, how much he paid, and what she would wear or do. He had been paying a sex worker for happy ending massages, referring to her as Sok, a common Cambodian name. It probably wasn't her real name, just part of the fantasy he was paying for. There was another conversation I found on his phone that immediately felt familiar. As I kept reading, I realized it was between Adam and Tyler. They had been covering for each other's affairs for years. Then I came across the most gut-wrenching part. They were chatting like usual, and Adam mentioned his upcoming appointment. Tyler said, "I bet you wish you could have just stayed in Cambodia, not have to deal with all this crap, huh?" Adam replied, "Hell yeah, but what can you do? I got deported, lol." Tyler responded, "Well, you were cheating on her too. I'm surprised she didn't turn you in the first time she caught you." Adam said, "Yeah, she still had hope until she caught me again." It was all a lie. The whole story about being imprisoned was fake. He hadn't been in jail. He just left me. That night, I slept on the couch, telling him I'd fallen asleep there. The next day, I asked Tyler to meet me, pretending I needed help with something. When he showed up, I showed him the evidence of his own affair and told him I'd send it to his entire family if he didn't tell me everything. Tyler spilled everything. Adam had been obsessed with Asian porn, particularly the happy ending massage fantasy, since high school. When we got together, it was because I apparently had the right look for him. Tyler tried to downplay it, saying Adam really did love me, but just had an addiction. I told him to cut the crap and tell me about Cambodia. Adam had been involved in an online affair with a Cambodian woman for 2 years before his trip. That means it started while we were already together. His bachelor trip was an excuse to meet her in person. What I didn't know was that Adam had gotten visas for both Thailand and Cambodia. Tyler didn't want to go to Cambodia, so Thailand became their cover story. They spent the first morning taking selfies around the resort, but after that, Adam left to meet up with the woman in Cambodia. He spent 3 days with her and decided he was in love. She came from a well-off family, and Adam wanted more, so he and Tyler concocted the plan for Adam to disappear. Originally, Adam only planned to be gone for 30 days before coming back, but when the time was up, he extended his visa by another month. After that, he just stayed there without any legal status. While he was living with her, he started cheating on her too. When she found out, she kept him around because he promised to help her immigrate to the US as his wife. But after 4.5 years, she caught him again, dumped him, and reported him to the authorities, which led to his deportation. Adam had to confess everything to his parents, who I had grown incredibly close to. They feared losing contact with Jason, so they decided to keep everything from me. That betrayal hurt almost as much as what Adam did. They even told him to stay away from me, but at the same time, they wanted him to have a relationship with our son. I don't understand how they thought that wouldn't conflict. Adam ignored their advice and worked to win me back. When he succeeded, his dad pressured him to marry me immediately and told him to stop his awful behavior. His dad thought Adam had had his fun and that marriage would straighten him out. But in reality, I had thrown away the best guy I'd ever had for a workaholic porn addict with a sick fetish. I feel like such a fool. I knew Tyler would tell Adam everything, so I sent Tyler's affair evidence to his whole family. Then I did the same with Adam's, sharing it with everyone I knew. Adam came home earlier than usual, completely furious and overwhelmed by messages. I already had my car packed with my things and the kids' belongings. My best friend had taken them earlier. Adam came at me aggressively at first, but I was ready for a fight. Then he tried to gaslight me, trying to explain things away, but I wasn't having it. I told him I knew about everything: Cambodia, the porn, the sex worker. He tried to defend himself, saying, "She's not a sex worker, just a college student trying to make some extra money." I shouted back, "That's even worse. You're exploiting a young girl who's struggling." He went silent after that. I told him he could expect divorce papers and nothing else. Then I left. It's been a few weeks now, and I feel like an idiot for not figuring this out sooner. I'm starting to recognize all the red flags I ignored. The long hours at work when we didn't need the extra money, the separate bank account, and how he always jumped at the chance to go on every business trip or conference. It was all just a way for him to feed his disgusting habits. The worst part is that he came back for me. He could have returned and just left me alone. I could have married Brian, and now, knowing what I gave him up for, I hate myself even more. Here's where I'm getting some pushback, though. I'm pushing for 100% custody with no visitation for him in the meantime. I have evidence of his porn addiction, work addiction, and his visits to sex workers. I'm also cutting off all contact with his parents. A few people, not many, are telling me that I shouldn't try to remove the father and grandparents from my kids' lives. But I disagree. I see Adam as a danger to them because of his self-destructive and manipulative behavior. As for his parents, they'll only see the kids during whatever supervised time Adam gets. Right now, I'm only willing to offer weekly supervised visits. Otherwise, I don't want them involved in my life at all. What do you all think? Am I going too far? Should I allow them to stay in my kids' lives? I know Adam is a good father when he's around, and his parents are great grandparents, but I can't move past the fact that all of it is built on lies and manipulation. Now, on to the next story. My boyfriend brought up the idea of swinging, and I'm not really into it, but I'm also scared of losing him. Hey, my name's Jenna, 21F, and I've been dating my boyfriend Ryan, 27M, for 3 years. We met at a party during my senior year, one my friend was hosting. Ever since then, we've been pretty much glued to each other. He can get a little jealous at times, but we genuinely love one another. 8 months ago, I moved in with him. It took a bit for both of us to adjust, but I think we've got the hang of living together now. I don't have a job at the moment since I'm in nursing school, and Ryan has a solid job, so I try my best to keep the apartment in order. I do wish he'd help out more, but I understand since I'm not contributing financially right now. Overall, our relationship is pretty solid. He likes to spoil me, which I really appreciate since I don't have much extra money to spend. He takes me out and buys me things, and it makes me feel loved. We also have a great sex life. It's pretty adventurous. We've tried lots of different things in the bedroom, and he's always had these fantasies, especially about role-playing. We've acted out cheating and partner-swapping scenarios, which I thought were just part of the fun. It didn't bother me much that I was usually playing someone else. It's all just pretend, right? But recently, something happened that threw me off. He said he missed dating. I get it, to some extent. There have been moments in the past few years where I've wondered about the wild things my friends are doing, but I chose not to because in a relationship, you prioritize your partner. You give up certain freedoms for that connection. So I let his comment slide, thinking he was just being a bit clueless. Then he brought up 2 of his coworkers who are in open relationships. I've met one of them, Olivia, who's in her mid-30s and married. Ryan's mentioned her here and there, but more like he was gossiping. He'd say stuff like, "You'll never guess what I saw today. Olivia kissed some guy who definitely wasn't her husband before coming into work. Can you even imagine?" He'd laugh it off, and I never thought he was seriously into that lifestyle. But then he met his new coworker, Lauren, 26F, and things started to change. He talks about her a lot, and it feels different. He talks about her like he's impressed, almost like he's got a crush. It's made me feel a little insecure. And then today, out of nowhere during lunch, he just asked, "What do you think about swinging?" I was stunned. I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled something like, "I don't know, I've never really thought about it." He responded with, "Well, we should talk about it. Don't you ever think about other guys?" I admitted, "Sure, but not like real people, more like celebrities, Chris Evans, not Michael from my class." "Do you think about people we know?" He shrugged and said, "Not really. I mean, maybe sometimes, but it doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying we're young. Now's the time to have fun before we settle down. I see how happy Olivia and Lauren are in their relationships, and I wonder if we'd enjoy it too. That's when I got mad. So this is about Lauren? I asked. He got defensive. No, she just makes good points. She says being in an open relationship has made her and her husband closer. They talk about everything now, and it's improved their intimacy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's really personal stuff to share with someone you've only known for 4 months. What else are you sharing with her? He snapped back, nothing. I told her how great our relationship is, and she shared about hers. That's it. She just suggested we try it to make things even better. Why are you getting so defensive? You always say I should be open about my thoughts and feelings. I backed off a bit because he was right. I do want him to feel safe talking to me. I don't want to be that girlfriend who shuts him down. So I told him, okay, that's fair. We can talk more later, but I need a break right now. Can we pick this up tonight? He agreed, and we hugged before going our separate ways for the rest of the day. That was a few hours ago, and now I'm sitting here, unsure of what to do. I'll listen to him tonight, but I can't shake this feeling that something's off. A part of me thinks he's going to suggest swinging with Lauren and her husband. I backed off a little because, after all, I'm always saying I want him to feel like he can talk to me about anything. I see all these TikToks about toxic behavior in relationships, and I refuse to be the kind of girlfriend who makes her boyfriend feel like he can't be open with me. So I told him, okay, that's fair. We can talk about it more later, but I just need some space for now. Let's revisit this tonight. He agreed, and we hugged before going our separate ways for the rest of the day. It's been a few hours since then, and I'm not really sure what to do or say. I guess I'll just listen to what he has to say, but I have this sinking feeling that he's going to suggest swinging with Lauren and her husband. And now, iJanette21F can't believe what went down last night. Even though I suddenly find myself single and without a place to stay, I actually feel incredible. As I type this, I'm sitting in a hotel room with Logan, 27M, a guy I just met on Thursday, yet it feels like we've been through so much together already. I'm heading back to my parents' house tomorrow, but tonight I just can't deal with explaining all of this to them. A few weeks ago, I shared about how Ryan, 27M, my now ex-boyfriend, tried to convince me to explore swinging. Eventually, I agreed to give it a shot, thinking it might just be a phase he needed to work through. But then he brought up Lauren, 26 again. Apparently she and her husband were interested in swinging too, and Ryan thought it would be a great idea for us to dive in together since everyone would be new to it. I was furious. I knew deep down something was off between him and Lauren. I confronted him, and of course he gaslit me, making me question myself. At the time, I didn't realize it, but looking back now, I see how ridiculous our relationship was. I mean, why was a 24-year-old guy even at a high school party in the first place? Despite my gut feelings, I fell for his lies again and agreed to meet Lauren and Logan for dinner. As the night went on, Logan asked for my number, wanting to talk without Ryan and Lauren around. We ended up texting a lot on Friday. See, Ryan had always painted this picture of how perfect Logan and Lauren's relationship was, how swinging had made them even closer. But Logan spilled the truth. Lauren had given him an ultimatum to open their marriage, and he almost left her after her first date. They weren't living the happy, carefree lifestyle Ryan had made it seem. At dinner, Logan and I couldn't help but notice how close Ryan and Lauren seemed. It made both of us uncomfortable. Afterward, we made a plan to go through their phones to see if they were cheating, and that this whole swinging thing was just an excuse to keep doing it. Lauren was smart. Logan couldn't find anything on her phone. Everything was strictly work. Ryan, on the other hand, wasn't as clever. It looked like they were using a messaging app since he had a few installed on his phone, and although there weren't any messages, that in itself raised a red flag. He did forget to delete a couple of texts, though. They weren't completely incriminating, but they were suspicious. Ryan, what did he say? Lauren, I told him we should just go and see what it's like. He agreed. Lauren, delete this and switch over. That was all I found. I asked Logan if anything like that was on Lauren's phone, and he said no. That's when I called him, we talked, and decided we needed to test them. It seemed clear that Ryan and Lauren just wanted a free pass to cheat together. Oddly enough, neither of us wanted to throw in the towel on our relationships just yet. So we decided to give it one last shot. We each asked if we could postpone the whole swinging idea for a while. We didn't want to go to Olivia's party the next night. Both of them told us we didn't have to do anything, but we said we'd go anyway. They both said almost the exact same thing. Olivia had made it sound like getting an invite was a big deal, and we'd be the only new couples there. Apparently, the other 10 had been doing house parties like this for a while. They hinted that if we didn't go, we might not get invited back if we decided we were into it later. So we agreed to go, hoping they'd choose us over each other. I was so anxious all Saturday that I thought I was going to be sick. I wasn't sure if I should eat beforehand, if there'd be food at the party, or if I should just skip eating altogether, and what was I even supposed to wear to something like this? Ryan didn't offer any suggestions. I decided on a little black dress that was probably a bit too short and had more cleavage than I'm usually comfortable with. Thankfully, it turned out to be the right choice. I wanted coffee but skipped it because my nerves were already on edge, so I just chugged water all day. That didn't help much either since I had to run to the bathroom every 10 minutes thanks to the nerves. We met Lauren and Logan outside of Olivia's place, which was honestly a really beautiful house. Logan and I exchanged glances like, all right, here we go. I hadn't met Olivia before, but she looked fantastic for 36 and having had 2 kids. You wouldn't have guessed it at all. When we walked in, it felt like a typical dinner party. There were some basic greetings, and then Olivia gave us a quick tour. They had a pretty impressive setup, lots of finger foods and plenty of drinks. I was feeling a little overwhelmed, trying hard not to stare at everyone. People were just chatting, nothing more. I don't know what I was expecting, but we arrived right at the start. There were supposed to be about a dozen couples tonight, and we were couple number 5, including the hosts. All the women were dressed similarly to me, which was reassuring. During the tour, Olivia explained some things, but I was too distracted to take it all in. I vaguely remember her mentioning that the rooms upstairs were set up for private play and something about changing the sheets. She introduced us to her husband, Brad, and then her boyfriend, Jacob. I probably should have paid more attention, but I was kind of zoned out. The only thing that stuck in my mind was something about thank God for those double doors, which got a laugh from everyone. I chuckled too, even though I had no idea what they were talking about. Apparently, it had to do with some changes she made to her dining room for the party. I was pulled back to reality when another couple arrived. It didn't really matter, but it caught my attention, and then I saw Leland and Lauren talking. He looked at her and said, "Want to head upstairs?" She nodded, and the two of them made their way toward the stairs without hesitation. Logan and I just stood there, watching them disappear. Before they vanished completely, Leland glanced back at me saying, "Come on." Then, just like that, they were gone, no second thought, no checking in. I felt a mix of sadness and anger rising in me. I turned to Logan and said, "Well, I guess we've got our answer. Might as well make the most of it." There was no way I was following them upstairs, not after that. Olivia had mentioned there were places to play downstairs, so I figured I'd find my own space, far away from those two. Logan, trying to keep up, followed me as I stormed away from the stairs. I didn't even know where I was heading, but after a few turns, I found myself in this massive room with 2 king-size mattresses pushed together. There was also a big L-shaped sectional in one corner, a decent-sized couch across from it, and one of those cube shelves with collapsible bins lining the wall. Without a second thought, I walked in, dropped my clothes on the floor, and didn't bother looking back at Logan. He quickly started undressing too, gathering my clothes and stuffing them into one of the bins. As he fumbled with his belt, I snapped, "Oh my God, just get over here already." He got his pants off, but instead of coming to me, he ran back over to the shelf to put his pants in one of the cubes. I blurted, "What are you doing?" He answered, "Olivia said we're supposed to use the cubes for our clothes. I don't want to be rude." Completely stunned, I responded, "Rude to who? We're literally the only people in here." He just shrugged and said, "Others might come in." I couldn't help but think, who on earth would walk into a room where 2 people are clearly messing around, especially with the doors wide open? Normally, I'm not this bold, but after what Leland had pulled, I wasn't holding back. Logan and I were getting into it when I realized the mistake I'd made by picking this room. A super fit guy, maybe around 45, laid down naked just a few feet from me, and seconds later, a busty woman, probably his wife, climbed on top of him. I freaked out for a second, blurting, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Is this your room?" The guy just smiled, clearly amused, and said, "No need to apologize. This is the group room." Group room? I turned to Logan. "Did you know this was the group room?" He nodded. "Yeah, she mentioned it during the tour." I had a moment of panic, but quickly calmed down. After a second of mild embarrassment, I realized I didn't really care. As things heated up between Logan and me, I kept catching the older guy's eye. Strangely enough, I liked it. That's when he looked at his wife. They exchanged a glance, and he turned to us, asking, "You guys want to swap?" Without hesitation, I agreed. Logan didn't say a word. The older guy reached into his bag and pulled out a condom, handing one to Logan when he realized Logan had left his in his pants. Logan panicked for a second, saying, "Oh crap, I left mine in my pants." The older man chuckled and said, "Don't worry, I've got plenty. Here, take this one." And with that, everything went from wild to absolutely surreal. The older guy just casually said, "Don't worry, I've got plenty," and tossed Logan a condom from his stash. I started with the older guy, and his wife paired up with Logan. Honestly, it was the craziest thing I've ever experienced. When I walked into this house tonight, I'd only been with 3 men in my entire life, and within 15 to 20 minutes, I'd been with 2 more. At one point, another couple joined in on the bed, and I glanced around to realize that 2 more couples had also entered the room. The whole atmosphere was intoxicating, like nothing I'd ever imagined. Logan and I continued with the older couple for a while, but in the end, we finished things together. I couldn't believe what I'd just done. Strangely, a part of me felt proud of myself. But then I looked up, and there they were, Leland and Lauren, standing in the doorway, glaring at us, like we'd crossed some invisible line. That's when things really started to unravel. The car ride home was an absolute mess, filled with yelling from start to finish. Leland kept accusing me of going too far, saying he couldn't even stand to look at me. I completely lost it and called him out on all his crap. I told him I knew that this whole thing was just a scheme so he and Lauren could have an excuse to cheat. Of course, he denied it, but I brought up the text messages and their suspicious behavior. The way they'd gone upstairs without a second thought, it was all too obvious. He kept insisting we were supposed to follow them, but they never once checked on us, never asked if we were okay, and they didn't take things slowly like we had agreed. I finally asked him point blank, "Did you and Lauren have sex, even though we didn't follow you?" He hesitated and then admitted, "Yes." I lost it. "So you didn't really need me there, did you?" I shouted. He started backtracking, saying it wasn't supposed to go that way, that we were all supposed to be paying attention to each other, and that Logan and I should have been focusing on them since they were the ones who brought this whole idea up in the first place. I was so furious that I had a moment of clarity. Why was I even with this guy? He was nothing but a walking red flag. That's when I ended it. I didn't say another word. I packed a bag, left, and didn't look back. As I walked out of the apartment, I checked my phone and saw that Logan had texted me to see if I was okay. Turns out he was going through a similar argument with Lauren. I told him what had happened, and he said he'd gotten himself a hotel room. I told him I was planning to head to my parents' house, though I wasn't exactly eager to explain everything to them. He offered to let me come to his hotel, and I agreed without a second thought. Now, I'm sitting here reflecting on everything that's happened. It's clear to me that Leland won't be part of my future, and honestly, I'm not sure what comes next. But for the first time in a while, I feel more confident in myself than I ever have before.